Most of you know,
This meeting is being recorded.
most of you know who we are, but I do want to take a moment and read a part of what our mission statement is and who we are. Smart Coast California is a 501c6 established in 2019 to promote and advocate for property rights and smart land use policies affecting California's 1,100 miles of coastline. We vet policies and consider each community as unique, and a one-size-fits-all approach to coastal properties does not work. Smart Coast California has a multi-pronged approach to common sense land use policies that will keep our coast beautiful and protect property rights. And I would add to that for years to come. So that's who we are. And I also would like to take some time to introduce our current board, but before I do that, I would like to let those of you know that we do have a few members that rolled off from our board last year, and I want to first off thank them very much for their commitment last year. Who are not moving on as far as board members this year: Matt Caprito, Thomas Schultze, and Jeremy Stanfield. And I want to thank Carla Farley really for her leading us last year as our president in 2021. She really took the reins and got us to a place where we are for this year for kind of a next level for us. So Carla, thank you very much for leading us last year. I'd like to take a moment now and introduce the 2022 board. I've already introduced myself. Paul Grissanti, Vice President. Ryan, and do I want to say Ole Haas or just Haas, or y'all know Ryan. Ryan is our treasurer. Jerry Becker, our secretary. Carla Farley is our immediate past president. Chris Anderson is on the board. Chris is not able to be here this morning either, and neither is Carla. Both of them have an association meeting, conflict with our meeting this morning, and Chris is being installed today. So we thank you for their service, both with Smart Coast and CAR. Aaron Berry is on the board. Katie Beacock, Suzanne Karn, Joyce Endow, Aaron Leader, Rose Marie McNair, Valerie Mishkin, Randy Stapleman, Jarrell Taylor, and Judy Taylor. And I just want to take a minute and also thank really the people that are the backbone of Smart Coast California. Our GADs, and I have to be careful because they are not our GADs, but they are the people that had the vision for this. They're the ones that took something out of their head and put it down on paper and have us to where we are today. And we would not be here without them. And they are our Association Government Affairs Directors, Krista Plesner, Marta Golding Brown, and Julie Tran. And you guys, they did not want, and I just noticed that your pictures are not up here like the president asked. So they did not want to have their names even announced, but I said, no, you guys are the backbone. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for the untold hours you put in to Smart Coast for us. And it does not go unseen nor unappreciated. So thank you guys very, very much. Just really briefly, as far as myself, I want to thank the board for their commitment this year. Any of us are only as good as those people that we surround ourselves with. And I have to tell you that the board that we have this year, I'm super excited for their passion, their experience, the years that they have in involvement with both coastal issues, community issues. We're in for an exciting year, and I think we've got a great board to support that and to support anything that we have coming up that will be before us at our table. So thank you all so much for your commitment to being here. I'm excited to be the one that was chosen to lead this year. I'm a bit nervous, I will tell you that. I think I've always said in anything that I do that there's always somebody a lot smarter than me. But when I surround myself with people that have experience like this, we're going to all make each other look good. So thank you all very, very much for your commitment this year. I would like to take time now to introduce our consultant, Don Schmidt, and Don is going to give a brief overview of where we are and what's going on. Don, good morning and thank you for being here.
Good morning, everybody. Audio check. We working okay here?
Yep.
Okay, great. I also want to thank everybody on the board, those who are outgoing, all the leadership, Carla, all the others. I'd like to welcome you, Joe. Looking forward to working with you over this next year. I know you're going to be a very steady hand on the wheel here. So I want to give a presentation and move things along here in regards to what's going on and some of the critical action items and policy issues that we're grappling with. Next slide, please. So sea level rise, that's one of the main things that we are dealing with pursuant to climate change. This is not a matter of debate in regards to what the law says, irrespective of what people's disposition is on the veracity of the science. This is the law that has been passed in Sacramento, going all the way back to the original global greenhouse gas final solution under the Schwarzenegger administration. And so the state is putting tremendous resources as our local governments to do long range land use planning, short, medium, and long range, to deal with sea level rise. So one of the first immediate problems we have is people like to say, let's use the best available science. And we agree with that. But you can see in this graph right here that what the Coastal Commission is asking the local cities and counties to utilize for their long-range planning is over 6 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. Now that's possible, but utilizing the very best available science, that's a 0.5% probability. That's a 1 in 200%, 1 in 200 chance that will actually happen. Next slide, please. We just disagree that that's really such a draconian worst case scenario on what we should be dealing with. So the board has voted on a number of top policy priorities. There's actually 5 here, and we're going to embellish upon these. And they deal with manage or treat, which we don't believe it should be universally applied, but should be selectively applied. The definition of existing development, regulatory takings, and rolling easements, and you'll see when I discuss that why those are kind of glommed together, and a tiered response to deal with sea level rise issues. Next slide, please. So manage or treat, the concept of manage or treat, and I realize some of you are seasoned campaigners on this, others perhaps not so much in regards to what that actually means, but in reality, it's a very common sense and wise land use planning policy that if you do a new development, if you tear down a home, if you tear down a commercial building, or if you propose a new building, you should build it far enough landward whereupon you will never have to worry about sea level rise. Of course, the problem with that is in the more urbanized coastal communities where they literally have no place to retreat to. Other places, it makes complete sense. Next slide, please. So another very important policy determination from the board of Smart Coast California is the definition of existing development. Now, existing to most people means just that, it's existing. And for many decades, well, for a number of decades and many years, the Coastal Commission took the position that existing means existing. But recently, they've been trying to walk that back and say that existing means any development that was in place in 1977 when the Coastal Act became law of the state of California. Next slide, please. Now, this is actually incredibly important because under Section 30235 of the Coastal Act, you are only entitled to get a shoreline protection device for, unless you're a coastal dependent use, which means like a marina or something like that. You're only entitled to have a shoreline protection device if you're an existing structure. And so if they can walk back to 1977, the definition of existing development, then that means that many hundreds, if not thousands of property owners will be left out in the cold in regards to their legal ability to apply for and obtain a shoreline protection device. Next slide, please. The next policy that has been adopted by the board is that as it pertains to regulatory takings. This is pretty fundamental, but you might be surprised how many people don't think that they need to pay attention to this. And it simply means that if you do not allow a property owner to protect their property pursuant to regulation, if you engage in regulations which takes the property, that's what the courts call a regulatory taking. And the government is responsible to pay the property owner fair market value and all the related costs at the time of taking. And one of the things Smart Coast has been communicating very strongly to local jurisdictions and to the Coastal Commission and to the press is that Article 1, Section 1 of the California Constitution specifies that it is an inalienable right for a property owner to protect their property from natural hazards. Next slide, please. So rolling easements is something which we included kind of glommed together at the beginning with the issues of takings. And here's a concept that you can see laid out what we got today: 40 years, 60 years, 80 years, 100 years, and 120 years. And basically, as you can see from this graphic, as should sea level rise manifest and should the shoreline retreat, that basically the mean high tide line would be a new defined public property area. The development would have to be modified so that the waves could come up underneath the property. And once they do come underneath the property owner would be compelled to either pay a lease to the State Lands Commission, because that would now be deemed public land, or they will have to tear down their home. Sadly, my predictions in regards to this have already manifested. There was a project appealed by the Coastal Commission to the Coastal Commission in the city of Malibu, where they then applied this special condition that said you can never have a seawall, and you will survey the mean high tide line every 5 years, and should the mean high tide line move underneath the house, that's not public property. Next slide, please. So the next concept that we need to discuss is that of the tiered response. Now, tiered response is something that has become popular with local jurisdictions, and the Coastal Commission agrees with the tiered response as well, as do we. The tiered response means basically, look, we've got these horrible projections that you saw at the beginning of the presentation, but are they really going to come true? And so we would monitor the levels of sea level rise, see what actually manifests, and then implement certain regulations and policies once they do. Where we part company with many folks out there, or some folks out there, especially with the Coastal Commission, is their tiered response default is to go immediately to manage retreat. We at Smart Coast California believe that the tiered response should be more enlightened. Next slide, please. Because we believe that there is a lot of different options, especially for these critical coastal communities, where we don't have to retreat. We don't have to let beautiful places like Pismo Beach and Santa Barbara and Laguna Beach and others fall into the sea. And those include beach nourishment, kelp forests, offshore reefs that's showing tremendous promise, groins, submerged breakwaters, and worst case scenario, community seawalls. Next slide, please. So those protection options I just articulated here, you can see them somewhat laid out, and they're gradually implemented, because dune restoration and beach nourishment is effective, but only if there's a nominal amount of sea level rise. If you do beach nourishment, that can be effective, but not if there's a lot of sea level rise. Now, the artificial reefs can be very, very powerful tools in the arsenal for our government, and local and state and federal, to reduce, if not eliminate, beach erosion and protect both the beaches and onshore development. And worst case scenario, for these critical core communities along the coastline, we should also have on the table shoreline protection devices. Next slide, please. So as already discussed, revetments and beach nourishment and installation of offshore sand retention reefs, and I'd like to embellish upon that a little bit more. Next slide, please. So artificial reefs have been used all over the world to protect beaches, to protect development. They're used in California mostly for habitat enhancement, which is actually phenomenally good news, because unlike other mechanical shoreline protection devices, This is one that everybody agrees will pretty much be something that is very good for the marine environment. Next slide. So the reefs break the back of the waves. They protect the beaches. The energy of the waves is dissipated offshore, and that would be that would basically result in the fact that the beaches would not be eroding anymore. And you can see pictures here that we're about to show you from the Narrow Neck Reef project on the Gold Coast of Australia, which is definitely on my vacation list going forward in the future, looking at these pictures. Next slide. So this is a picture from storm erosion on Narrow Neck back in 1996. This was taken at high tide. Please note the configuration of the beach. Please note the rock revetment, which is protecting the parking lot and the development along the shoreline. They then built an offshore reef. Next slide, please. And this is taken in 2001 at high tide after the reef was constructed. You can see the beach is broad. It accreted. The revetment is still there, but it is buried. It is a win-win. And one of the things that we've been passing on in these discussions and debates that we have been having is the realtors and others up and down the state of California. Everybody is committed to the protection of the beach, as is the Coastal Commission and many of the NGOs out there. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned before, down in California, most of the reefs that have been constructed have been for improvement of habitat values. There's studies that have come out where 200 to 400 pounds of biomass grows on these reef balls that you see here. This is sitting on the beach before they put it in the water. You don't leave it up on the highland area like this. And this is a project that just got approved and is going in down in the southerly part of San Diego Bay. It is for habitat enhancement, but it is also to catalyze sediment accretion. That's a fancy way of saying to reduce erosion of the beach in this particular area. The next slide, please. So we've been making presentations and talking to folks in the local jurisdictions. Smart Coast California recently made a presentation up in the Pismo Beach area. The mayor of Pismo Beach was there, as were a number of other notables. And of course, Joe facilitated that meeting. I made this presentation. And what you see here is something that is being done all up and down the state of California. It's the vulnerability assessments to show with the levels of sea level rise anticipated how far inland it's expected that the shore will retreat. Next slide, please. So much of Pismo Beach, as many of you know, is bluff development. The whole up coast area is kind of a core part of the community. And although it's not as dramatic of a photograph, the bluff erosion that is shown in this vulnerability assessment is actually pretty devastating to these communities. Next slide. And you can see here, this is another picture from the vulnerability assessment, that there was just huge swaths of this community that are mapped to be at risk. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we showed is we proposed places where Pismo Beach could build these artificial reefs. It's a combination of a soft and a harder strategy for dealing with sea level rise. The cost estimated to protect this very long section of the city of Pismo Beach was $47 million, about $10.5 million per mile. This was very warmly received by a number of people up in that community, including some very well-known environmental activists who attended our presentation and have reached out to Smart Coast and my offices to learn more about these reefs options. Next slide, please. So the concept would be that a community would work with the neighborhoods to form GHADs, geologic hazard abatement districts, to take a community approach to deal with sea level rise. And one of the significant options, of course, would be these artificial reefs. Next slide, please. It should be noted that there is tremendous benefit to the tax base. Going back also, not just speaking about the cost to local governments to having to condemn private property if they do not allow them to protect themselves, but they also, should those properties be allowed to tumble into the sea, that's obviously going to be injurious to the tax base for the local community. Here you see some other options. We're showing a half-mile long reef in Cambria. and then a little over a mile long on the Morro Strand State Beach. The dollar figures, by the way, may seem large. They're not. When you compare the cost of shoreline protection devices, which are very often done on an ad hoc basis, property owner by property owner, it is this much money or more per foot. Next slide, please. Concurrent with the construction of an offshore reef, in many cases, what you'd want to do is a beach nourishment project. I need to talk to my staff about getting a less ugly picture of the beach nourishment that you're seeing down there at the bottom. The reality is beach nourishment projects do not work on eroding beaches, but if you build the offshore reef, you can import the sand and the sand will stay where you put it. So again, it's a win-win for the general public as well as the communities and the property owners. Next slide, please. And if you're protecting the beach with offshore reefs and things of that nature, then you can also, when you bring in the sand, you can also engage in dune restoration projects, which significantly continues to improve the habitat, the aesthetics of the area, and does provide additional protection for those periods of time where there's overtopping of the offshore reefs. Next slide, please. Now, in some areas, this may or may not work. It's beyond this presentation to get into the details of coastal engineering. That's another presentation sometime in the future. But there's some places where it simply needs to be on the table that you have shoreline protection devices. And make no mistake, the Coastal Commission, a lot of the NGOs, they absolutely loathe seawalls and rock revetments. And the reason they hate them is the aesthetics, but also there's some pretty credible science that wave refraction off of these shoreline protection devices erodes, shortens, and narrows the beach. And of course, if you've got a lot of sea level rise, like they're talking about 6 feet, and you just did nothing but build seawalls all over the place, then essentially you would have a wall that goes down into the water and there would be no beach. And that's something which I don't think anybody is very supportive of, but there is going to be certain communities where that is going to be a case of last resort and it should be on the table. And by the way, the Coastal Commission acquiesces that certain infrastructure like the industrial ports like Los Angeles, Long Beach, San Diego, they're not going to be retreating. They're not going to be doing anything except building larger breakwaters and seawalls because there's no place for them to retreat to, and they're just too critical to the economic viability of the state of California and the economic well-being of the state of California. Well, Smart Coast believes that, in fact, these coastal communities are also culturally just not dispensable and economically not dispensable. And so if the industrial ports have that as an option, we believe that the core areas of some of these coastal communities also should have this as an option. Next slide, please. There has been some progress and compromise in that regard. In the last year, Morro Bay received approval from the local coastal program amendment. Joe and others testified at that in front of the Coastal Commission. Although Morro Bay had managed a treat for the beach areas up coast, they did have specific policies for the bay itself, where the Embarcadero is, the core commercial area, the tourist area, the just charming heart of Morro Bay. And it says right inside that LCP that they will, in fact, increase the height of the shoreline protection devices, reinforce them, and do seawalls. And in fact, the Coastal Commission concurred with that, which we thought was progress. And that local coastal program was certified. Next slide, please. And I'll wrap it up with this. Pending in front of the Coastal Commission right now is the County of Santa Cruz's local coastal program amendment. And they have a very intriguing component in that LCP, which is a shoreline protection exception area at Sokol Point, going down to the Capitola city limits. Now, I haven't plopped on here the vulnerability assessment, but the vulnerability assessment shows these bluffs eroding back dramatically, and there being a significant loss of all the shoreline bluff top development up there in Santa Cruz County. This is south of the city of Santa Cruz. And in the shoreline protection exception area, the LCP envisions that the county would work with the local neighbors to form GHADs, again, geologic hazard abatement districts, for a community seawall. The community seawall would be to protect the infrastructure and the residences and businesses along the tops of the bluff, and to promote access as sea level rise occurs, should it occur as expected. And that would be facilitated by vertical lateral access ways along the top of the shoreline protection device. So that would be viewed as a win-win. Of course, one of the things that's not in there is the option of the offshore reefs, as we discussed earlier in the presentation. So this is very, very unique. This is new. This has never been proposed in the state of California. And I will sort of wrap up with a general principle here. This is my last slide, but I want to embellish upon a concept that we have, that we are bringing forward on our negotiations and discussions with the local jurisdictions and in the California Coastal Commission. What they're doing, they being the Coastal Commission and the various agencies that are working with the Coastal Commission to deal with sea level rise, is they're trying to take a more holistic approach. I don't mean in the airy-fairy, let's sage the room type of concept. Holistic in the original definition, all-encompassing, taking everything into effect. And when it comes to beach erosion, bluff erosion, the protection of existing development, historically that has been something that has been done on an ad hoc basis. And so an individual property owner will come in for a permit to protect their structure. Now, manage or treat is something, and this is a little disconcerting, that the Coastal Commission can try to effectuate on an individual basis. Remember, every single beach house and bluff house or business in the state of California is within the appealable jurisdiction of the commission. And so that means that local jurisdictions and property owners ignore the directions of the Coastal Commission at their peril, because the Coastal Commission has the appealable authority to question every single permit issued by a county or a city for a bluff or beach fronting development. That being said, implementing manage or treat on an ad hoc basis is very difficult, because you're creating gaps. Whereas the other property owner, if they do make the definition of existing development, they can build a seawall. They can build return walls, even if the property owner next to them isn't allowed to do that. And so you would get this jagged jigsaw puzzle kind of approach on this that really would not work. And so I'll wrap it up with this. What we are proposing is that, yes, take the holistic, bigger picture approach, but do it in such a fashion that we protect our core communities, that we have things like the offshore reefs and the beach nourishment to protect large swaths of these communities, as opposed, again, on an ad hoc basis. So with that, I will wrap it up, and I am available for any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Don. Don, there are a few questions in the chat. I don't know if you've seen those. We're waiting on Otto, Katrina, CRR president, to come.
Otto just arrived.
Okay. Dawn, are you here for a few minutes? What I'd like to do is introduce Otto, and then after Otto, have you answer those questions before we go on.
I'll stick around, yes.
Awesome. Thank you.